Hello culture hashers, welcome to the channel, welcome to a brand new review, and today we're going to talk about the fourth studio album from Carly Rae Jepsen, entitled Dedicated. The Carly Rae Jepsen story so far has been fascinating and started in 2008 when she finished third place on Canadian Idol. She followed this up with the 2008 album Tug of War. It was quite folky and indie inspired, passed a lot of people by, and Carly Rae Jepsen wasn't really on a lot of people's radar until the release of her smash hit single, Call Me Maybe. Call Me Maybe was pure bubblegum pop from Carly Rae Jepsen and remains her best known song to date. This song is intrinsically linked to Carly Rae Jepsen's legacy, and that's due to its massive success. It was one of the biggest songs released in 2011 and on the end of year singles charts in both America and the United Kingdom. Call Me Maybe was the second highest selling single of the entire year. Call Me Maybe was a brilliant pop track, just great bubblegum pop, very simple, catchy hook, brilliant production, and Carly showed a lot of personality on here. For better or worse, Call Me Maybe defines Carly Rae Jepsen's legacy, and a lot of people consider her to be a bubblegum pop sort of artist, but she lacks the chart success to really overshadow Call Me Maybe as people's yardstick for measuring what Carly Rae Jepsen's sound is. To capitalise on the chart success of Call Me Maybe, Carly released her second studio album, Kiss, in 2012. This album was full of unimaginative pop songs and didn't impress me from a quality perspective aside from a couple of tracks. Album 3, Emotion, was where Carly Rae Jepsen really started to fulfill this potential we'd seen from her. This 2015 album reimagined Carly Rae Jepsen's sound. On here she worked with indie-minded producers like Dev Hynes, aka Blood Orange, and Vampire Weekend's Rostam Bantmangli. Apologies if I've messed up the pronunciation of that name. This album came at a critical time in Carly Rae Jepsen's career, a time when she might have been considered a one-hit wonder, but the success of Emotion just showed that she was one of the most interesting pop artists around at the moment. At the centre of these tracks was a strong pop core that was just taken in interesting directions with some like 80s synth pop. There was a strong disco influence on here, and Emotion saw Carly take her pop sound and move it in an innovative and imaginative direction. Emotion was one of my favourite albums from 2015, and I still listen to tracks like Warm Blood, LA Hallucinations, and I Didn't Just Come Here to Dance to this very day. There was a real 80s nostalgia added on top of Carly's traditional pop roots. But it's been 3 years since Emotion's release, and Carly's reputation has grown as a result of this album's critical success. So people were wondering what direction she'd take her sound in on this new album, Dedicated. Heading into Dedicated, I had high expectations for this next chapter in Carly's career. This album features a new team of producers distinct from the ones we saw on Emotion. Carly intentionally worked with a new production team to make the sound different to what we heard on Emotion. Jack Antonoff of Bleachers and formerly Fun produces the track Want You In My Room, and he's actually worked with Carly on her 3 most recent albums. Aside from Antonoff, Carly works with new faces like John Hill, who co-produces 6 tracks on here. Production trio Captain Cuts, best known for co-producing the 2014 hit Shut Up and Dance for Walk the Moon. They co-produced 2 tracks on here, most notably Party for One of the pre-singles that was released prior to Dedication. Party for One, along with Now That I Found You and No Drug Like Me, was something I discussed in the pre-release EP that came out a couple of months ago from Carly. I enjoyed these tracks and I like how they've been fitted into the Dedicated album. From my impressions of this pre-release EP, I mostly got what I expected from Dedicated. On this album, Carly's like fun and playful as you'd expect. There are some great choruses on here. I also think there's quite a bit of continuity with Emotion, as a lot of the tracks on Dedicated are either throwbacks to the 1980s or to the 1990s. Like Emotion, Dedicated has a significant amount of influence from 1980s synth pop, 1990s R&B, as well as poppy disco sounds that are a bit more popular at the moment, as well as a couple of tracks that take inspiration from trap sounds. The track I'll Be Your Girl is probably the best display of this trap sound. Feels a bit like faux trap, I suppose. The trap element on this track mostly comes in the form of the insistent percussion, which underscores Carly's pop vocals. Very nice chorus on here, but feels a little bit overproduced. So with Dedication kicking off with the trifecta of Julian, No Drug Like Me, and Now That I Found You, it's only when we arrive at the fourth track that we come to a song that we haven't already heard from Carly Rae Jepsen. Not that there's a problem with Carly releasing some of Dedication's tracks before the album comes out, but I don't like that it takes 4 tracks before you hear a brand new song from Carly Rae Jepsen on this album. On the other hand, I must praise a good piece of sequencing on this album. Placing tracks 8 and 9, Too Much and The Sound, next to each other was a great move here. When Too Much comes on, 8 tracks into the album, it's time to bring down the energy a little bit. The album starts really strong, really high energy tracks towards the front, but then by the time we get to Too Much, Carly takes it down a little bit and brings in a bit of a mid-tempo electro track. Too Much is a decent single. It's a little bit slow. I feel like it could have been given a bit more impetus. I think Too Much is okay. It was a pretty decent single. I feel like it would benefit from a remix giving it a bit more energy. But I like what Carly's done here. The video for it's quite entertaining as well. There's like loads of different versions of her doing stuff in a room. It's quite good. It's a decent mid-tempo electro-inspired track, and it transitions nicely into the sound. A slightly slower track, but one that I enjoy a lot more. It's a slower take on these big emotions Carly's feeling, as she wants to hear the sound, presumably the sound of like commitment from a partner, and it takes the energy down a little bit slower than the previous track. But I think these two work quite nicely together and give a nice little lull in the sort of second third of this album. I like the way that these two tracks come next to each other and the tempo shift that they both bring to the album, slowing it down a little bit after this big start that we had. As you'd expect from a Carly Rae Jepsen album, Dedicated is all about fun. It's all about putting like a smile on these big emotions that Carly's feeling. I quite like that Carly Rae Jepsen uses a lot of innuendo, a lot of like nudge nudge, wink wink. I think the most saucy we get is the chorus of Want You in My Room. Carly likes to allude to sex on this album, and that is fine. We don't need every song to just be thrusting like sex in your face. Like we don't need to have like Migos level of like graphic sex on this album. I think sometimes like a little nudge, a little like, yep, you know what I'm talking about. I think that's cool sometimes. And I like that Carly Rae Jepsen doesn't really need to thrust her sexuality in your face. She just alludes to it on here. And I like that Dedicated is a fun album. And there were some great moments on here, like the disco-inspired bass line on Happy Not Knowing. Another track with great energy and a really catchy chorus. Want You in My Room is another great track. Want You in My Room is just dripping with like 80s nostalgia. It's just got these gorgeous synths and a fantastic bass line. And there's even a little talk box section towards the second half of it. Honestly, couldn't get more 80s if it tried. But I feel like Dedicated is a little bit too long. Carly Rae Jepsen apparently wrote over 200 songs in the process of this album. It's 15 songs long in the deluxe version, clocking in at about 50 minutes long. And even though Carly made decisions like leaving off the title track on here, it doesn't really hold your attention for the entire duration and sort of sags a little bit towards the second half. By the time I reach Right Words, Wrong Time, I feel like Carly's already made her point with this project, and I feel like maybe cutting out some of these tracks might have made the project a little bit more urgent and given it a little bit more sticking power in my mind. I do think we might get an Emotion side B sort of situation here, where Carly releases some more of these tracks that were recorded in these sessions in some sort of follow-up project. I would certainly be interested in hearing these, because Emotion Side B, the subsequent work that came out after Emotions, had some good moments on there, like Cut to the Feeling. And I'm sure Carly's got some bangers that she's recorded for Dedicated that didn't quite make the album's cut, but would be okay in like some sort of B-side project coming out either this year or next year. Overall, I feel like Dedicated is a little bit of a step back from Emotion. I feel like the last two Carly Rae Jepsen albums have been very nostalgia influenced. There's been a lot of looking back at the sounds in the 80s and the 90s, and it might be time for Carly to move on and try something new in terms of her sound. In terms of quality, Dedicated is a bit of a step back from Emotion, and it feels like Carly's still exploring some of these ideas, whereas she could have been revolutionising her formula. Having said that, despite this album feeling like a little bit of a step back, there are still some great songs on here. Songs like Now That I Found You, Automatically in Love, and The Sound are thoroughly enjoyable, and I really like that Carly's just sticking to her guns on here and just doing her own thing. So for me, it was a bit of a difficult one. I was toying with the idea of giving it a 6, but overall, Carly Rae Jepsen, Dedicated, is worthy of 7 out of 10.